In this section we will look at one mound from Cahokia as an example of how mortuary ritual is used to create and reinforce chiefly power. Mound 72 is located on the north-south axis that connects it with Monk's Mound and with another mound on the other side of Canteen Creek. Mound 72, you also notice, is oriented in a different degree than Monk's Mound. Monk's Mound sides are oriented to true north, south, east, west, whereas Mound 72 is oriented so its long axis points towards the winter solstice sunrise on the east and the summer solstice sunset to the west. This photo shows Mound 72 before it was excavated. In 1969 and 1970, the mound was completely excavated, and it revealed that it had been repeatedly used over a 100-year period for elaborate funerary rites. It included the burial of high-status individuals, perhaps even the paramount chief of the community, as well as deposits of multiple human sacrifices. While nowhere near as large and impressive as Monk's Mound, the materials within show an impressive degree of political and ritual power that the ruling elite controlled. The excavations uncovered 272 burials from over a 100-year period beginning around AD 1050 and lasting through 1150, and this century was the period of time when Cahokia rose to its greatest power. It seems to be when the religious beliefs that underpinned the political systems of chiefdoms were developed and institutionalized, and the burials within this mound were part of this institutionalization of chiefly power. The mound was constructed in a series of 3 stages, each associated with an important and large burial deposit. It began with the placement of the Birdman burial and the associated human sacrifices and high-value goods that were buried as offerings. This was covered with a mound and is at the southeastern end of the feature. Later, to the northwest, an additional mound was built overlying a charnel structure. The charnel structure was buried underneath it with bundle burials associated with the structure, and 3 large human sacrifices. First, 2 that contained 20 women and men, and another 17 women and men, and then a later deposit when the mound was finished and a ramp was built to lead to its summit that contained 24 women. In between the 2 mounds that were created through these burial rites, another deposit was later placed that had 4 decapitated men with interlocking arms and an adjacent pit with 53 sacrificed women. This deposit was then covered to connect the 2 previously existing mounds to create one long mound that was oriented from the southeast up to the northwest, where the southeastern corner points towards the winter solstice sunrise and the northwestern point of the mound is oriented towards the summer solstice sunset. After the mound reached its final form, there were additional burials placed into its flank. I show here only the 2 large mass deposits that are of greatest interest. There are 39 individuals that were buried in a pit with evidence of violence, broken skulls, embedded projectile points, and then overlying these 39 violently killed sacrifices were 15 litter burials, meaning that they were on sort of stretchers that were created using poles of eastern red cedar, which, because it is resistant to decay, was preserved, allowing us to see how these bodies were transported to and laid to rest. Some of these litter burials were bundle burials, They had already decayed, become disarticulated, and were bundled together. In fact, one of the litter burials has 3 individuals bundled together on it. So these were important people brought from, some cases, other locations in order to be entombed within the mound above a mass human sacrifice. And just above and to the upper left of this litter burials is a series of other burials that were placed into the mound during the final years of its usage. And several of these are also bundle burials that were transported from elsewhere where they had decayed, become disarticulated, and then bundled together. So this was an important mound where important people were transported to over a 100-year period to join their ancestors, perhaps descendants of the original chief whose burial created the mound. The mound was initiated with the burial of this individual. He is sometimes called the Birdman because he was laid to rest on a bird-shaped cape that was covered with thousands of shell beads. You can see the raptor-shaped head of the bird just to the left of the individual's skull, and how it is shaped with wings and feathers towards the other end. This individual laid out on top of the bird-shaped cape has his head pointing towards the winter solstice sunrise, and his feet pointing towards the summer solstice sunset. Under the cape is another individual whose head and feet are pointing in the exact opposite direction of the individual lying on top. And then there are 4 sacrificed individuals who are placed in the cardinal directions surrounding this central burial. The burial has been interpreted as representing the relationship the chief has with the culture hero Redhorn or Morning Star, and depicts his ascension out of the underworld after his defeat of the cannibal giants and his defeat of death. Thus perhaps the symbology of him lying on the cape with another individual underneath, because Redhorn was first defeated and killed by the cannibal giants, and then he resurrected himself, defeated them, defeating death, and returned to the Earth's surface world. So this would have been a powerful myth to recreate at the time of the chief's death and the installation of his successor, who would then adopt this identity as the reborn Morning Star, the defeater of death, here on the Earth's surface. The sacrifices at the 4 cardinal directions may indicate the cannibal giants who Morning Star defeated. 62% of the burials from Mound 72 are interpreted as human sacrifices. These 4 men were clearly sacrificed. Their heads and their hands were removed before they were buried, and there is artistic evidence of human sacrifice and decapitation, as we see here in this statue from Spiro, Oklahoma, which shows a warrior holding a captive down, preparing to remove his head with a specialized weapon, a mace that is shown at the bottom. These weapons were flaked from stone and then polished in order to create a razor-sharp edge that would be used to inflict damage upon the enemy, and in some cases remove their heads. We also see trophy head pots, ceramic vessels that were made in order to look like decapitated human heads, that were taken as war trophies. The pots depict the people as dead. Notice the state of their eyes, and the one on the bottom with its mouth agape. At another mound site further north in Illinois, the Dixon Mounds, a similar sacrifice of 4 men who had had their heads cut off was discovered in excavations, and these men's heads had been replaced with trophy pot heads, and each of these pots had been made in a different location, not at the site where they were buried, and this was determined on the basis of the tempering material, the sands and other rock particles that were found within the clays that made the pot. allowing us to identify the geological and geographic source of the materials used to manufacture the pot. So it's possible that these individuals who were sacrificed were not from the local community. Perhaps subjects from conquered areas or war captives from enemy peoples. Adjacent to these 4 sacrificed men in Mound 72 was a burial pit with 53 female sacrifices. These skeletal remains did not have any evidence of trauma or violence, no broken bones, no cut marks, no embedded projectile points. They had not had their heads cut off. But they still are believed to have been human sacrifices. It is 53 women of the same age category, all in their late teens, early 20s, and if it was a mass deposit that was the result of something like illness that swept through the community, we would expect all age categories, those that were younger, those that were older, and also both sexes, both men and women. But this is all women, suggesting that this single deposit was a ritual deposit of women that were sacrificed. Observations made by French explorers in the early 1700s of the funerary rites for the chief of the Natchez tribe, a Native American group that lived in western Mississippi along the Mississippi River, provide some analogies to these human sacrifices. When the chief, the great son of the Natchez, died, every community that was under his rule had to contribute females who were then sacrificed and accompanied him into the afterlife. These women were brought to the central city of the Natchez, where they were drugged with tobacco. They swallowed pellets of tobacco that put them into a stupor, and then they were strangled. This strangling would not leave any skeletal traces of trauma, like the women that are found in the burial pits at Mound 72. So we see a difference in the way that male and female sacrifices are treated, with the men dispatched with a considerably more violence than the females. The presence of these human sacrifices indicates the degree of power and control that chiefs had in Mississippian society, where not only do they control politics and ritual and the economy, but they also had the power of life and death over their subjects. Adjacent to the Birdman burial was a mass deposit of artifacts that included hundreds of projectile points, as well as shell and copper objects, and a large collection of chunky stones. Now, in these 2 areas, you may see that there are distinct clusters of points, with sharing the same form, points sharing the same materials, suggesting that they were deposited by individuals that came and placed clusters of arrows within the burial. People coming perhaps to pay their final respects to their chief, to show their allegiance to him, and also swear it to his successor. This mass of offerings was placed over another 7 human sacrifices, and you can see the jawbone and teeth of one of these in the right-hand photo, just below where it says 337 points. There's a wide variety of projectile point forms that are found within Mound 72, and this variation suggests that these different styles of points were made by different groups that had different cultural traditions of how to manufacture a projectile point. You have a sharp pointy rock that you attach to the end of a stick in order to propel it at your target. But how you shape that sharp pointy rock? Does it have serrations along the blades, yes or no? Do you have notches on the side? Do you have some sort of stem or basal notches? All of these are choices that are guided by certain cultural values and things that you learned. What is the right way to make a projectile point? How did my father or uncle teach me is the proper way? So these different types of points indicate that people from different communities with different traditions came together at Mound 72 to make offerings to the chief as he passed into the afterworld, and as his successor was anointed and assumed office. These Cahokia tri-notched points, triangular points with two narrow side notches and another narrow notch on the base, are characteristic of the Cahokia region, were made in that region and used by the people who lived there. And these deposits likely represent those made by local peoples to their chief. But there are also points made in non-local styles and from non-local materials. Across the top row are points made in a distinctive style characteristic of the Caddoan Mississippian, who lived in Louisiana and eastern Texas. And the bottom row are points made from a distinctive material that is found in northwestern Arkansas, and in a form that is also typical of that area. So these points indicate that people from these distant places came to participate in these mortuary rituals, to make offerings to the chief, to validate their allegiance to the deceased chief, and also to make their allegiance known to his successor. So what to remember about Mound 72? The differences in the burial treatment of the individuals placed within the mound indicate the presence of a chiefly elite with the power of life and death over his subjects. Within the mound there are several elite burials, beginning with the Birdman, and then the later litter burials and bundle burials of elites who were brought to be added to the mound, to join the chief in this mound, to be connected with these ancestors and with their political and ritual power. There are also commoners, the sacrifices, peoples whose lives were forfeited for the benefit of the chief in order to assist him to make that journey into the afterlife. The burial of the Birdman sought to associate this deceased chief with the culture hero Morningstar and his triumph over death. So we see the bird-shaped cape upon which he lies, and the other individual underneath, which may metaphorically represent his rebirth and his defeat of death. The chunky stones that were found, the stones used in the game that he played against the cannibal giants, and then the 4 sacrificed individuals that may represent those that he defeated. The funerary rites would not have just laid to rest the deceased chief, but would have been used to invest the new chief with this identity as the Morningstar, who had defeated death, who continues to rule despite the death of his predecessor. The chief is dead, but long live the chief, because the chief is born again. The projectile point offerings indicate that mourners assembled from great distances. It suggests the geographic extent of the chief's political influence, that this paramount chief at Cahokia had political influence that extended as far away as eastern Texas, and perhaps an equal distance to the east into the southeastern United States.